We can now get into this further with Daniel Rubenstein, former aide to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Daniel, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Our reporter spoke to a cousin of one of the dead hostages today. He said the solution to end this crisis is signing deals. But Netanyahu says no ceasefire and plans for an intensified military campaign continue. Is Israel's Prime Minister ignoring his people's wishes?
The people of Israel wish for two major things. One is the safe return of every hostage that remains in Gaza. Hamas is holding them in underground terror dungeons, torturing them, starving them. We want them home immediately, and we want the whole world to call on Hamas to release them. We also want the Hamas terror regime out of power. It was the Hamas terror regime that invaded Israel on October 7th, gunned down hundreds of people at a music festival, went house to house, massacring families, burning parents and children together. That regime cannot be allowed to survive this war because it pledges to keep doing this again and again until Israel is destroyed. So Hamas must go, and the hostages must come home.
How realistic is it that Israel can completely eradicate Hamas? I think this is a question a lot of people are asking. And also, Hamas has released Israeli-American hostage Alexander. That was today. The group says they're hoping this will pave the way for a possible return to ceasefire talks. What do you make of this?
The reason that Hamas took hostages in the first place is so that it could urge Israel to release convicted Palestinian terrorists from Israeli prison, and so that Hamas could get away with the massacre. Hamas took hostages so that it could get away with gunning down hundreds of people at a music festival and going house to house and burning families in their homes. The reason that Hamas took hostages, the reason that Hamas holds hostages, is so that it can be in a position to do this again and again. The reason that removing Hamas from power has been a challenge is precisely because Hamas is holding hostages, and Israel wants to see those hostages come home safely, and therefore Israel is open to negotiations that will see a peaceful end to this war where Hamas gives up power in exchange for allowing all the people of the region, Israeli and Palestinian alike, to have a better future than the one that Hamas has brought it now.
So Israel was not involved in the negotiations over the release of Idan Alexander. The deal was brokered by talks between Hamas, the US, Egypt and Qatar. Why was Israel not directly involved? And when was Israel actually informed of these details?
If Israel is not involved, then it would mean that Israel is not making any concessions in order to receive a hostage. That, in my mind, would be a good thing. But big picture, the President of the United States has said in the past that there will be all hell to pay if Hamas does not release all of the hostages. Hamas has not released all of the hostages, and President Trump is giving time for diplomacy to be an alternative and preferred method. Israel wants diplomacy to achieve the obvious result for all of humanity, which is that Hamas will not be in power and be in a position to carry out more massacres.
The US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is actually in Israel today. Donald Trump does arrive in the region tomorrow. As I mentioned, Hamas said today they want a way back to ceasefire talks. Do you think Israel is going to pause its military offensive and begin these negotiations and try and forge a path forward to save your hostages and save lives in Gaza?
It's been a year and a half since Hamas started this war, and a year and a half that Hamas continues to hold hostages. Israel has said that if Hamas releases hostages, then there will be a ceasefire for as long as Hamas continues to release hostages. Hamas cannot be allowed to drag on negotiations in order to achieve a stronger grip on power than it already has. So no, Israel is not going to allow Hamas to drag this out unless Hamas starts releasing hostages. It's ceasefire in exchange for hostage release, and final ceasefire in exchange for Hamas giving up power and allowing a more responsible government to take power in Gaza than the one that currently exists.
Is Israel prepared to start saving lives in Gaza and stop blocking food?
Israel and the United States have been working on a mechanism that would see food enter the Gaza Strip that would not reach the Hamas terrorist army that is governing the Gaza Strip. This has been a big problem in the past, where Israel has allowed massive amounts of food and supplies to enter the Gaza Strip. Hamas, being the government of the Gaza Strip, gets its hands on these food and supplies, makes prices go up, and uses the revenue of the taxes that it takes to maintain its grip on power. So we're trying to find a middle ground where the civilians of Gaza will not pay the price of their government, the Hamas terrorist army. And that requires a new way of thinking that Israel and the United States are together trying to set up. And this process could begin very shortly, where we see more food and supplies entering Gaza, where people who are not part of Hamas can come pick them up, and that Hamas will begin to feel the pressure after a year and a half of war and decide that it's time to move on and allow a more responsible government to take power in Gaza than the one that is currently bringing us to this position.
Daniel, what exactly does that deal look like? Will it be done through private aid agencies, or will the UN facilitate with that?
From what I've heard, the United Nations and related aid agencies have said that they will not cooperate with the new U.S.-Israeli mechanism that is under discussion. As it has not been fully published, I don't know all of the details, but some of it has been published, and it's clear that there are new ideas for setting up zones in Gaza, allowing people to reach these zones to get the necessary food that they need, and keeping Hamas out of the picture so that Hamas cannot hijack the aid and sell it on the black market for very high prices, that it will then use the revenue to pay its fighters, to pay the people who are still holding hostages, and to prolong the war for longer and longer.
Daniel, just moving away from Hamas for a minute, does Israel recognize that people and children and families are starving to death due to this blockade, and there's no medical, there's nothing to help these people right now? Is that recognized by the Israeli government? Is there a concern about how these civilians are surviving?
There is a huge concern about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. For a year and a half, Israel has been hearing international aid agencies say that starvation is imminent, starvation is imminent. It's an exaggeration to say that there is mass starvation in Gaza. Certainly there is pressure on the entire population in Gaza. You just need to have a little bit of common sense and understand that the situation is because Hamas, the government of Gaza, decided to start a war against its neighbors, and its neighbors decided that they don't want to die. And they are not going to allow the free shipment of food and supplies to the Hamas terrorist government, which is using the revenue from these sales of the food and supplies to continue its war. We're trying to find a middle ground, a reasonable answer to this difficult humanitarian situation while Hamas is holding hostages and starving them. Hamas is starving the hostages that it is holding. The food that reaches Gaza, Hamas does not give it to the hostages. It's an unbearable situation. We need more pressure, not just on Hamas, but on Hamas's backers, specifically the royal family of Qatar, the regime in Qatar, which seem to have told Hamas just recently that it needs to free the American hostage. Qatar clearly could tell Hamas to release the hostages. It is not doing this. It is clear that Qatar told Hamas to keep the hostages until Hamas gets a deal that allows Hamas to remain in power. So let's shift some of the focus to Qatar, where Hamas's leaders are living quite comfortably, despite the fact that they engaged in a barbaric war crime on October 7th. They are living in Qatar comfortably. We need more pressure on Qatar to extradite Hamas leaders so that they can face trial for crimes against humanity.
Well, Daniel, Donald Trump will be visiting Doha in Qatar this week. I wonder if that will be a conversation topic that we'll see happen.
I'm not optimistic that it will be a conversation that we will see happen. I seem to be a minority voice on this that is screaming about the role of Qatar. Most people prefer to ignore it because Qatar has paid so many people to be in a position where it's beneficial to them to ignore it. But it's very clear that Qatar thought that the October 7th massacre was a good idea. On the afternoon of October 7th, Qatar put out a statement condemning Israel Qatar said that Israel was solely responsible for the October 7th massacre, and Qatar has consistently taken grossly irresponsible positions that put everyone in danger and prolong the war. So I'm using the platform that you have graciously provided me to let your viewers know about the role that Qatar is playing. Qatar told Hamas to keep the hostages. Qatar is behaving like an enemy state, and I hope the whole world will...
Daniel Rubenstein, former aide to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm so sorry we couldn't carry on this conversation, but once again, thank you for your thoughts. Much appreciated.
Thank you.